You have 48 hours to surrender our people, or we will dismantle your empire piece by piece." The words rang out, sharp and unyielding, across every corner of the Galactic Empire's dominion. Broadcast through encrypted channels, the message was delivered by a figure whose weathered face radiated defiance: Admiral Kael Voss. Standing aboard the Resolute, the flagship of humanity's newly resurrected fleet, his gaze pierced the screen with unwavering conviction. Kael's words carried a promise of destruction, not bravado. Behind him, Earth's fleet loomed in readiness, silent predators concealed in the vastness of space. The black ships, once decommissioned relics, now bristled with lethal innovations, the culmination of decades of clandestine development. "Admiral Voss, the Empire isn't responding." Kael turned, his eyes narrowing on Taver Jin, the wiry tactician who had become his most trusted lieutenant. Taver's voice carried an edge of disbelief, as though he couldn't fathom the Empire's arrogance. "They're calculating," Kael replied, his tone as cold as the void, "but they've made one fatal mistake." "And what's that?" Taver asked, leaning in, tension sharpening his features. "They've underestimated Earth." Kael pivoted toward the viewport. Through its reinforced panels, the flicker of distant stars seemed almost tranquil, masking the storm brewing in the shadow of Earth's moon. The fleet was a marvel, but it wasn't its weapons that made Kael confident. It was the will of humanity, the fierce, unyielding spirit forged in Earth's crucible of gravity and storms. "Signal the countdown," Kael commanded. Taver hesitated. "Admiral, are we sure they'll hear us?" Kael's lips curved into a grim smile. "They'll hear us, Taver. Whether they listen, that's their mistake to make." In a stark contrast to the quiet tension aboard the Resolute, the Empire's council chambers blazed with activity. Holographic projections of alien officials filled the cavernous room, their expressions ranging from amusement to disdain. "Humans?" one scoffed, his scaled visage twisting in mockery. "They send an ultimatum, as if they are equals." High Chancellor Vorak Thalen, a towering figure draped in opulent robes, raised a hand to silence the murmurs. His eyes, dark and calculating, fixed on the transmission replaying Kael's words. "Do not dismiss them too quickly," Vorak said, his tone a careful balance of authority and skepticism. "Desperation makes the weak bold. Still, I see no fleet capable of backing their threats." An advisor leaned in, his voice low. "The colonies report strange activity, movements near their restricted zones. It's unlike anything seen before." "Let them play their games," Vorak said, reclining into his throne. "When their time is up, we'll remind them of their place." Back aboard the Resolute, Kael stood in the ship's war room, a sprawling chamber filled with tactical displays and restless officers. The air was thick with the scent of heated metal and ozone, the byproducts of systems running at full capacity. Screens glowed with data, projecting star maps and fleet movements. Drellin Kane, the ship's navigator, approached, his boots clinking softly against the steel floor. "Admiral, the black ships are ready. All systems green." Kael nodded, his focus unbroken. "And Arion?" Kine hesitated. "The AI is operational. It hasn't shown any deviations, but its silence is unsettling." "Good," Kael said curtly, though a shadow of doubt flickered in his eyes. He had fought against reactivating the ancient AI, knowing its reputation for ruthless efficiency. But the stakes left no room for idealism. "Arion is a tool," Kael muttered to himself. Nothing more. Taver, who had been monitoring the feed from the Empire's central sectors, glanced up. "Admiral, incoming report. No response from the Empire yet. Their fleet is mobilizing." Kael's jaw tightened. "Of course they are. What's their trajectory?" "They're consolidating near the Lyris belt," Taver replied. "Standard defensive posture." Kael allowed himself a rare smirk. "Defensive? They think we'll fight on their terms." His gaze swept the room, landing on each officer in turn. "Make no mistake, gentlemen. They've underestimated us. They believe Earth is a backwater, its people weak. What they've forgotten is that Earth doesn't break. We adapt, we survive, and now we strike." The fleet began its synchronized maneuvers, engines humming with a deep vibration that resonated through the hulls. The Resolute led the formation, its sleek black frame reflecting the faint glow of Earth's distant sun. Kael moved to the bridge where the view was both breathtaking and foreboding. From here he could see the black ships assembling, a dance of precision and menace. The ships themselves were a testament to Earth's ingenuity. Armored hulls laced with experimental alloys, railguns mounted alongside solar pulse cannons, and cloaking systems that bent light itself. A soft ping drew his attention to the console. Kane's voice cut through the quiet. "Admiral, countdown initiated. 47 hours remain." Kael leaned forward, his hands gripping the console. "And the Empire?" "No significant movement yet," Kane replied, his tone clipped. "They're watching." Kael's eyes narrowed. "Then let's give them something to watch." He tapped a command, and a projection of the Empire's colonies appeared. "Tavor, prepare a strike simulation for the primary outposts. I want options on how to hit them without exposing our fleet's location." "Yes, sir," Tavor said, his fingers flying over the console. As Kael studied the map, a faint vibration coursed through the deck, a reminder of the power beneath his feet. He felt it not as a sound, but as a presence, a coiled predator waiting for release. On the edges of Earth's orbit, the black ships moved with calculated precision. From the shadow of the moon, their dark forms emerged, their surfaces absorbing light. The fleet looked like ghosts, silent harbingers of retribution. Within the Resolute, tension crackled. Officers murmured in hushed tones, their movements sharp and purposeful. The countdown was no mere formality. It was a declaration of intent. Kael's voice cut through the quiet. "This is our moment. The galaxy has looked down on us for too long. When the timer hits 0, they'll see what humanity is truly capable of." "Admiral," Tavor interrupted, his voice carrying urgency. "Unidentified vessel approaching from the outer rim. No transponder codes." Kael's expression hardened. On screen, the display flickered, revealing a sleek alien ship with a design unfamiliar to any known faction. Its movements were slow, almost deliberate, as though testing the waters. "Analysis," Kael demanded. "Unknown origin," Kane said, his tone cautious. "It's not broadcasting any signals." Kael's mind raced. Was this a scout? A defector? Or something else entirely? "Hold position," Kael ordered. "Let them make the first move." The room held its breath as the ship drifted closer. For a moment, the tension was unbearable, every second stretching into an eternity. Then, without warning, the vessel blinked out of existence, leaving only an empty void behind. Kael exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. "They're testing us. Make sure we're ready." The countdown ticked on, its final moments drawing nearer. The stage was set, and Earth stood poised to challenge the might of the galaxy. But in the shadowed corners of the Empire's throne room and the hidden depths of humanity's own fleet, forces moved unseen. Kael glanced at the timer once more. 46 hours to go. He whispered as much to himself as to his crew, "Let them come." Kael's gaze lingered on the empty void where the mysterious vessel had vanished. The image remained imprinted on his mind, a silent challenge wrapped in uncertainty. He stepped back from the console, the tension in the room clinging to him like static before a storm. "Admiral, should we initiate pursuit protocols?" Tavor asked, his fingers already hovering over the tactical controls. "No," Kael said sharply, his voice cutting through the charged atmosphere. "That's what they want. If we chase shadows, we expose ourselves." The bridge crew exchanged wary glances, but obeyed. Kael's expression remained carved in stone as he turned to Drellin Kane. "Make sure our cloaking systems are impenetrable. If they're watching, let them see nothing." "Yes, sir." Kane's reply was brisk, but there was unease in the set of his shoulders as he moved to execute the command. Kael allowed himself a moment to process the encounter. The Empire rarely operated with subtlety, and the vessel's disappearance was deliberate, a taunt, a test. But from whom? The Empire? Or something else entirely? The cold air of the Resolute's bridge bit at his skin, the faint taste of recycled metal lingering on his tongue. The muted clicks of keyboards and the soft murmur of officers filled the silence, a stark contrast to the tempest brewing in Kael's mind. "Admiral." Tavor's voice snapped him back to the present. "We've received an encoded message from one of the colonies. It's unusual." Kael raised an eyebrow. "Unusual how?" Tavor hesitated, his eyes flicking to the screen. "It's from one of their governors, Larn Vestral. He's asking to defect." The room stilled. Even the subtle movements of the crew seemed to freeze, as though the words themselves had stolen the air. Kael straightened, his voice calm but edged with suspicion. "Play it." The message crackled to life, the grainy image of a haggard alien figure filling the screen. Vestral's features were marred by exhaustion, his voice trembling with desperation. "To the leaders of Earth, I speak not as a servant of the Empire, but as a being seeking redemption. The chains we forged for your people will one day bind us all. I offer intelligence and my loyalty in exchange for sanctuary." Kael leaned closer to the console, scrutinizing every flicker of the governor's expression. He didn't trust it, not fully. The timing was too convenient, the offer too clean. "Tavor, authenticate this transmission. Kane, plot a secure route to intercept if it checks out. I want contingencies prepared if this is a trap." "And if it's not?" Tavor asked cautiously. Kael's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then we'll learn just how desperate the Empire's allies are becoming." The message ended, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. Kael turned back to the bridge, his voice cutting through the stillness. "This changes nothing. We stick to the timeline. The Empire doesn't dictate our pace." As he spoke, the faint vibration of the ship shifted slightly, a subtle reminder of the immense power beneath their feet, waiting to be unleashed. Kael's instincts prickled. Something was coming. Hours later, the war room was a hive of activity. Holographic projections of the Lyris belt hung in the air, shimmering with data overlays and tactical schematics. Kael stood at the center, flanked by Tavor and Kane, their faces lit by the glow of the displays. "We've confirmed unusual energy signatures around the Empire's forward fleet," Kane reported, his voice steady. "It's consistent with some kind of shield system, but the readings are erratic." Tavor leaned closer, frowning. "Erratic how?" "Power fluctuations, high output but unstable. It could be experimental." Kael's eyes narrowed. "Or bait. The Empire doesn't reveal its hand unless it's trying to draw ours." Tavor gestured to the map, highlighting the Empire's positioning. "If they're consolidating forces here, it's either to protect something or to lure us into overextending. Either way, it's a risk." Kael studied the display, his mind racing through scenarios. Every choice carried weight, every decision the potential to tip the scales of war. The faint hum of overlapping voices around the room blurred into background noise as he focused. "They're waiting for us to make the first move," Kael said finally. "But we won't play their game. We hit where they're weakest, force them to react. Kane, identify the most vulnerable outposts along their supply line." Kane's hands danced over the console, bringing up a list of targets. "There's a station near the Argon Rift. Minimal defenses, critical to their logistics." Kael nodded. "Good. We strike fast and hard. No warning, no time for reinforcements. Tavor, coordinate with Arian for tactical overlays. I want precision." Tavor hesitated. "Admiral, about Arian. It's been uncharacteristically quiet." Kael's jaw tightened. The AI's silence was as unnerving as its presence. "It's waiting for us to falter. We won't give it that satisfaction." As the plan took shape, Kael's thoughts drifted to the governor's message. If Vestral's defection was genuine, it could provide the leverage they needed. If it wasn't, they'd deal with the consequences. The first strike came hours later, swift and devastating. The black ships descended upon the station near the Argon Rift like shadows made flesh. Railguns roared, their kinetic slugs tearing through the station's defenses with surgical precision. Explosions lit the void, brief bursts of fire and metal that painted the darkness in fleeting flashes of destruction. Kael watched from the Resolute's bridge, his face impassive. The station crumbled under the assault, its remaining forces scattering like insects before a flood. He felt no triumph, only a grim satisfaction. This was war, brutal, efficient, and unrelenting. "Admiral, the station is neutralized," Taver reported. "Minimal resistance. We're extracting supplies now." Kael nodded. "Good. Have the fleet regroup and maintain cloaked positions. The Empire will respond, but we dictate the terms." As the fleet withdrew, Kael's gaze lingered on the debris field left in their wake. Each shattered piece of metal was a reminder of the cost, one they could not afford to ignore. "Admiral," Kane said quietly, his tone laced with unease, "we've detected another unidentified vessel near the Argon Rift. Similar readings to the one from earlier." Kael's eyes hardened. "Track it. I want to know what it's doing and why." The ship remained at the edge of their sensors, a phantom presence that refused to reveal itself. Kael's instincts screamed that it was no coincidence, but without answers, all he could do was prepare. As the countdown continued, the shadows around them deepened. The Empire was watching, waiting for a mistake, and somewhere beyond the reach of their understanding, an unseen force moved, its intentions unknown. Kael's voice broke the tense silence. 45 hours. Stay sharp. This is only the beginning." "Admiral, the unidentified vessel is holding its position," Kane reported, his tone measured but taut. The soft flicker of the tactical screen illuminated his face as data streamed in waves of incomprehensible patterns. "It's still not broadcasting any signals. No movement for the past hour." Kael stood at the bridge's center, his sharp gaze locked on the display. The air carried the faint tang of heated circuits, mingling with the sterile chill of recycled atmosphere. Every moment of silence felt heavier, more deliberate, as though the stillness itself was bait. "Maintain our position," Kael ordered. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it, like the first crack of ice before it shatters. "If they're watching, let them keep watching. The longer they hesitate, the stronger our position becomes." Taver Jin approached, his steps measured, his lean frame tense. He held a data slate, its glowing surface casting shifting shadows over his gaunt features. "We've received preliminary intel from Vestral. Supply routes, fleet positions, enough to disrupt their logistics if it's accurate." Kael took the slate, scanning the details with a critical eye. Vestral's information was almost too precise, too perfectly timed. "What's your assessment?" Kael asked, handing the slate back to Tavor. Tavor hesitated, his brow furrowing. "It's actionable, but I don't trust the timing. The Empire doesn't let governors defect without consequences. If this is a trap, it's one we can't afford to walk into blind." Kael nodded, his thoughts aligning with Tavor's. "We'll verify before committing. Send the data to Arian for analysis." Tavor's lips pressed into a thin line. "Admiral, are we sure we want to rely on Arian for this? The AI's strategies, efficient as they are, lack nuance." Kael turned to face him fully, his expression unreadable. "Nuance doesn't win wars, Taver. Precision does. We use every tool we have, even the ones we'd rather not." Tavor's shoulders stiffened, but he nodded and moved to relay the command. The bridge settled into a tense rhythm, the crew's movements deliberate, their focus razor-sharp. Kael shifted his attention to the viewport. Beyond the Resolute's reinforced glass, the black ships floated in disciplined formation, their dark hulls absorbing light like celestial predators poised to strike. The silence of space stretched infinitely, broken only by the occasional flicker of distant stars. The stillness was deceptive, Kael knew. The Empire was watching and waiting just as they were. The question wasn't if they would act. It was when. "Admiral," Kane interrupted, his voice cutting through the quiet. "We've detected energy spikes from the unidentified vessel. It's powering something large." Kael's pulse quickened, though his expression remained stoic. "Weapon systems?" "Unclear," Kane replied, his hands moving deftly over the console. "The readings are inconsistent, but the output is significant. Whatever it's doing, it's not standard tech." "Maintain cloaking protocols," Kael ordered, his mind racing through possibilities. "Do not engage unless provoked." Taver approached again, his pace brisk. "Arian's analysis is complete. It corroborates Vestral's intel, but it flagged inconsistencies in the governor's transmission patterns. There's a 5-second anomaly in the message feed. Kael's jaw tightened. Could it be interference? Unlikely, Taver said, his tone grim. It's deliberate. Someone altered the feed after transmission. Kael exhaled slowly, the weight of the revelation settling over him. So the question isn't whether we can use the intel. It's who wants us to. Taver nodded. And why? Kael paced to the central console, his boots striking the deck with soft, deliberate precision. His mind churned with calculations, each scenario branching into a web of risk and opportunity. The Empire's machinations were labyrinthine, but Kael knew one thing for certain. Hesitation was the enemy. We proceed, he said finally, his voice resolute. We use the intel to stage a strike on the outer colonies. Hit them hard, fast, and without warning. If it's a trap, we spring it on our terms. Taver didn't argue. He simply nodded and moved to execute the plan. The room buzzed with subdued activity as the fleet prepared for deployment. The tension was palpable, a living thing that coiled around them, feeding on their doubts and fears. Hours later, the Resolute and its fleet emerged from their cloaked positions, slipping through the void like phantoms. Their target, an Empire outpost orbiting a gas giant in the Viren system. The outpost was a critical supply hub. Its destruction would cripple the Empire's logistics in the sector. Kael stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. The outpost loomed in the distance, its spires glowing faintly against the backdrop of the gas giant's swirling clouds. Taver, Kael said, his voice low but commanding. Commence the operation. Taver relayed the command, and the black ships moved into position. Their railguns charged with lethal energy, their cloaking systems dissolving to reveal their imposing forms. The outpost's defenses scrambled, their energy shields flickering to life too late. The first volley hit with devastating precision, railgun slugs tearing through the outpost's outer structures. Explosions rippled across its surface, casting fiery bursts into the void. The air on the bridge grew electric, the faint vibration of the Resolute's weapon systems coursing through the floor beneath Kael's feet. Shields are failing, Kane reported, his voice steady despite the chaos. The outpost won't hold much longer. Kael's eyes narrowed. Ensure their communication arrays are neutralized. No warnings to nearby fleets. As the black ships unleashed their fury, the outpost crumbled under the assault. Its spires collapsed in slow, silent arcs, consumed by fire and debris. Kael watched, his expression unchanging. There was no satisfaction in destruction, only the grim acknowledgement of necessity. Admiral, Kane said, his tone shifting, the unidentified vessel is back. It's on the edge of our sensor range, observing. Kael's gaze snapped to the display, where the vessel's silhouette hovered like a specter. The timing was too precise to be coincidence. Track it, Kael ordered. I want to know what it's doing and why. The fleet regrouped, their mission accomplished, but the tension aboard the Resolute remained. The vessel's presence was an enigma, a puzzle Kael couldn't afford to ignore. As the countdown continued, the mystery deepened. Vestral's intel, the unidentified vessel, and the Empire's silence were threads in a tapestry Kael had yet to unravel. Each piece brought him closer to the truth, but the picture it painted was anything but clear. Kael's voice broke the heavy quiet. Prepare for the next phase. We push forward. The bridge crew moved with purpose, their resolve unshaken despite the unknowns that loomed ahead. Kael's thoughts churned, the weight of command pressing down on him. He knew the storm was only beginning, and the choices he made in the hours to come would determine not only their survival, but the fate of humanity itself. As the Resolute drifted through the void, the countdown ticked relentlessly on. Kael stood at the edge of the bridge's main console, his fingers gripping the cool metal railing as the Resolute drifted through the darkness. The tactical display showed the remnants of the destroyed outpost, its jagged skeleton glowing faintly in the shadow of the gas giant. It was a victory, but one that came with too many questions. The unidentified vessel lingered just outside their sensor range, its presence like a thorn in Kael's mind. Admiral, Kane called from his station, his voice a mix of tension and curiosity. The vessel has shifted its position. It's closer now, just within long-range scanners. Kael's eyes flicked to the screen, narrowing. Closer, but still out of reach. They're testing us again. He straightened, turning to Taver. What's your read? Taver's fingers danced over the controls, pulling up the ship's trajectory. It's deliberate. They're positioning themselves to observe. No attempt to engage, no signs of weapon activation. Send a recon drone, Kael ordered, his voice cold and precise. Deploy it under cloak, full data relay. I want a closer look. Taver nodded, relaying the command. The bridge was bathed in the soft glow of tactical displays, the air thick with the faint tang of ozone from overworked systems. Every officer moved with practiced efficiency, their focus razor-sharp. The drone launched silently, a shadow slipping into the void. Kael watched its progress on the display, his mind calculating possibilities. The Empire's silence had stretched too long, and this vessel, this enigma, was beginning to feel like a piece of a larger game he hadn't yet deciphered. Admiral, incoming data from the drone, Taver said, transmitting visuals now. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the vessel in stark detail. Its design was unlike anything Kael had encountered, smooth organic curves that seemed to flow together like liquid metal. Its surface pulsed faintly, as though alive, and a dark red glow emanated from its core. What is that? Kane murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Not Empire tech, Taver said, his tone cautious. It doesn't match any known profiles. Kael stared at the vessel, unease coiling in his chest. Analyze the energy readings. I want to know what powers it. As the bridge crew worked, the Resolute remained on high alert. Kael felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. This wasn't just an enemy ship. It was something more, something unknown. The stakes had shifted, and the consequences of miscalculation had grown sharper. Admiral, Tavor said, his voice cutting through the tension. The energy signature, it's not static. It's fluctuating, almost like it's responding to something. Responding to what? Kael demanded, his tone hardening. Taver hesitated. I don't know, but it's not random. It's deliberate. Kael's jaw tightened. Recall the drone. I don't want to risk exposure. As Taver relayed the command, Kael turned his attention back to the larger picture. The vessel's presence was a threat, but it was also a distraction. The Empire was still out there, consolidating its forces, and every second they spent on this anomaly was a second the enemy used to prepare. Admiral, Kane interrupted, his voice urgent. New movement detected. Empire fleet approaching our position. 3 ships, battle class. Kael's eyes snapped to the display. The Empire's ships were sleek and angular, their formations precise. They weren't here to observe. They were here to strike. Battle stations, Kael ordered. The bridge erupted into motion, officers calling out commands and relaying updates. The Resolute systems roared to life, the air vibrating with the hum of power as weapons and shields activated. Bring the fleet into formation, Kael commanded. We hold this position. They want to test us? Let them. The black ships moved with lethal precision, their dark forms shifting into a defensive posture. The Empire's ships closed the distance, their weapons glowing faintly in the void. The tension on the bridge was electric, every second stretching into an eternity. Enemy ships entering firing range, Taver reported. Weapons primed. Hold, Kael said, his voice steady. Wait for my command. The Empire's ships opened fire first, beams of energy slicing through the darkness. The Resolute's shields flared, absorbing the impact with a burst of light that painted the bridge in flickering hues. Return fire, Kael ordered. The black ships unleashed their fury. Railguns fired with deafening precision, their kinetic slugs punching through the void with unstoppable force. Explosions rippled across one of the Empire's ships, its hull crumpling under the assault. Kael felt the vibration of the Resolute's weapons through the floor, a steady reminder of the power at their disposal. Enemy ship disabled, Taver reported. 2 remaining. Focus fire on their lead vessel, Kael said. Force them to retreat. The battle raged, a symphony of destruction that filled the void with flashes of light and trails of debris. The Empire's ships fought with precision, but they were outmatched. The Black ships moved as one, their coordination flawless, their firepower devastating. "Admiral, the unidentified vessel is moving," Kane said, his voice tight. "It's heading toward the battle." Kyle's attention snapped to the display. The vessel was closing in, its dark form cutting through the chaos like a predator stalking its prey. "Track its movements," Kael ordered. "Do not engage unless it fires." The vessel didn't fire. It didn't take sides. It simply moved through the battlefield, its presence a silent, menacing force that drew the attention of both fleets. "What is it doing?" Tavor asked, his tone laced with frustration. Kael didn't answer. He couldn't. The vessel's actions defied logic, its purpose shrouded in mystery, but one thing was clear. It wasn't here by chance. As the battle reached its peak, the Empire's ships began to retreat. Their lead vessel, heavily damaged, fired a desperate volley before pulling back, its engines burning with a fierce glow. "Do we pursue?" Tavor asked. "No," Kael said firmly. "Let them run. We've sent our message." The Black ships held their position, the battlefield littered with the wreckage of their victory. But the celebration was short-lived. The unidentified vessel remained, its ominous glow casting eerie shadows over the debris. "Admiral," Kane said, his voice low, "it's broadcasting a signal." Kael's eyes narrowed. "Translate it." The signal played through the bridge speakers, a series of sharp alien tones that sent a shiver down Kael's spine. It wasn't Empire code. It wasn't anything they'd encountered before. "What does it mean?" Tavor asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kael didn't answer. His mind churned with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. The vessel's signal was a message, but to whom? And for what purpose? As the bridge fell into uneasy silence, Kael felt the weight of the mystery pressing down on him. The answers lay ahead, but so did the danger. The countdown continued, and Kael knew the storm was far from over. Kael stared at the vessel on the tactical display, its pulsing glow casting strange reflections across the polished console. The signal it broadcast was relentless, alien tones rising and falling like a melody designed to unsettle. The sound burrowed into his mind, scratching at his thoughts with unspoken questions. "What's its angle?" Kael muttered, almost to himself. Tavor, standing at his side, glanced at the data streaming across his screen. "It's not targeting us, but it's not ignoring us either. This isn't an observer, it's a participant." "A participant in what?" Kael snapped, his frustration finally cracking through his measured tone. "Admiral, we're intercepting fragmented code within the signal," Drellin Kane interjected from his station. "It's complex, adaptive. It's not a message. It's an interface." Kael turned sharply. "Explain." Kane's brow furrowed as he continued parsing the data. "It's behaving like an invitation, designed to sync with compatible systems. If Arian responds, it might establish direct communication." The air on the bridge thickened, a silent weight pressing against everyone present. Kael's pulse quickened. "Has Arian reacted?" "Not yet," Kane replied, "but the AI is monitoring it." Kael's fists clenched at his sides. Arian's silence had been unnerving enough without the introduction of a sentient alien vessel. If it engaged, the consequences could spiral beyond his control. "Tavor," Kael said, his voice tight, "pull Arian's access to external data streams. I don't want it interfacing with anything outside this fleet." Tavor hesitated. "Admiral, if we restrict its systems, it may perceive it as interference. The AI operates best when—" "I'm not debating this," Kael interrupted, his voice cutting like steel. "Do it now." Tavor nodded and moved quickly to execute the command, his expression unreadable. Kael stepped back, exhaling deeply. The bridge's faint vibrations resonated under his boots, a reminder of the Resolute's restless potential energy. He needed clarity, but the situation only grew murkier with every moment. "Admiral," Kane said cautiously, "the vessel is moving again. It's leaving the debris field." Kael looked up at the main display. The alien ship drifted smoothly, its glowing core dimming slightly as it turned away. Its departure felt less like retreat and more like a calculated withdrawal. "Let it go," Kael said. "Track its trajectory and notify me of any deviations." As the vessel disappeared from view, Kael turned his attention back to the Empire. Their fleet had retreated, but he knew it was a temporary lull. They would regroup, adapt, and strike again. The question was how much time humanity had before the next assault. "Admiral, I've analyzed Vestral's intel," Taver said, rejoining Kael with a data slate in hand. "It's consistent with what we've observed so far. Supply chains, fleet positions, it all checks out." "And the anomalies?" Kael asked. Taver's expression darkened. "Still there. Whoever tampered with his transmission wanted us to act on it. The Empire may be baiting us into overextending." Kael nodded slowly, his mind racing through possibilities. "Then we don't play into their hands. We use their own tactics against them." He gestured to the tactical display, highlighting a series of systems along the Empire's supply line. "We strike here, here, and here, simultaneously. Small, precise attacks to disrupt their logistics without revealing our full fleet's location." Taver raised an eyebrow. "Divide and conquer?" "Exactly," Kael said. "Force them to spread thin, stretch their resources. They'll either pull back to consolidate or expose critical weaknesses." As Taver relayed the orders, Kael felt the familiar surge of focus that came with planning. Each move had to be deliberate, calculated, and unrelenting. Anything less would cost lives. Hours later, the black ships split into strike teams, their sleek forms slipping into the void like predators stalking unseen prey. Kael monitored their progress from the war room, his eyes fixed on the tactical displays as updates flowed in. "Team 1 has engaged their target," Taver reported. "Minimal resistance. Station defenses are down." "Team 2 is reporting similar success," Kane added. "No reinforcements detected." Kyle's lips pressed into a thin line. "And Team 3? "Still en route," Kine replied. "No contact yet." Kyle nodded, his thoughts lingering on the alien vessel. Its actions had been deliberate, calculated, and now it was gone. The timing felt too convenient, as though its presence had been orchestrated to distract them. "Admiral," Taver said, breaking his reverie, "we've intercepted a communication from the Empire. It's encrypted, but heavily fragmented." "Let me see it," Kael said. The transmission played across the display, its garbled audio punctuated by sharp, metallic tones. Kael leaned closer, his brow furrowing as he tried to decipher its meaning. "What are they saying?" Taver asked. Kael's eyes narrowed. "It's not a direct order. It's a warning." Kane looked up from his station. "A warning? To whom?" Kael exhaled sharply. "To themselves. They're reacting to something, but it's not us." Taver frowned. "Then who—" An alarm cut him off, the sharp tone echoing through the room. "Admiral," Kane said, his voice tight, "we're detecting a massive energy surge in the sector. Unknown origin." Kael's jaw tightened. "From the Empire's fleet?" "No," Kane said, his hands moving rapidly over the controls. "It's coming from the same trajectory as the alien vessel." The room fell into a tense silence, the weight of the revelation pressing down on everyone present. Kael's mind raced. The vessel's signal, its movements, its strange energy, all of it was leading to this moment. But to what end? "Prepare the fleet," Kael ordered, his voice steady despite the unease creeping into his chest. "If this is another test, we're ready." As the Resolute's systems roared to life, Kael felt the tension in the air thicken. The countdown continued, and with each passing second the mystery deepened. The alert tones faded, leaving a charged silence in their wake. The bridge was a hive of activity as the crew scrambled to process the incoming energy readings. The Resolute vibrated faintly, not from its own systems, but from the gravitational ripples propagating through the sector like invisible waves. "Admiral, the energy surge is intensifying," Kane said, his voice laced with urgency. His hands moved swiftly across the console, pulling up layers of data. "It's not from the vessel itself. It's activating something." Kael's gaze locked onto the tactical display. The trajectory of the alien vessel intersected with a point now glowing ominously on the map, a dead zone marked as uncharted space. It was a void, an area deliberately avoided by every star chart in existence. "What's in that sector?" Kael asked, his tone sharp, demanding answers that no one seemed to have. Taver leaned closer to his screen, his brow furrowed. "Nothing. At least, nothing officially recorded. No trade routes, no colonies, just empty space." "Empty space doesn't generate energy signatures like that," Kael growled. His knuckles tightened against the railing as he stared at the anomaly. The glow on the display intensified, pulsing rhythmically, a heartbeat of raw power. Each pulse seemed to radiate through the Resolute itself, vibrating through the deck plates and into Kael's chest, like an unspoken warning. "Admiral," Taver said cautiously, "Arion is requesting access to the anomaly's data." Kael turned, his expression darkening. "Requesting or demanding?" "Requesting," Taver clarified, though there was a tension in his voice that suggested the difference was slim. Kael weighed the decision. The AI was a necessary tool, but every interaction with it felt like feeding a beast that could one day bite back. He couldn't deny the efficiency it brought, but neither could he ignore the unease it stirred. "Grant it limited access," Kael ordered. "Restrict its parameters to observational data only." Taver hesitated for a moment before executing the command. "Parameters set." The lights on the bridge dimmed momentarily as Arion accessed the anomaly's readings. A synthesized voice, calm and precise, echoed through the air. "Anomaly identified. Probable construct of pre-Empire origin. Energy signatures suggest activation sequence nearing completion." Kael's brow furrowed. "Pre-Empire? Elaborate." The AI's response was immediate. "Chronological markers indicate origin predating the Galactic Empire by approximately 5,000 years. Construct design suggests advanced gravitational and temporal manipulation capabilities." "Gravitational and temporal manipulation?" Kane echoed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You're saying it's a weapon?" "Uncertain," Arion replied. "Data incomplete. Further observation required." Kael exhaled sharply. The situation was spiraling into territory he hadn't anticipated. A pre-Empire construct capable of bending gravity and time was a variable he couldn't control, and the alien vessel was leading them straight to it. "Track that vessel's every move," Kael ordered. "If it interacts with this construct, I want to know the second it happens." Taver nodded, his focus locked on the tactical display. "Understood." The alien vessel slowed as it approached the anomaly, its glowing core now pulsating in harmony with the construct's energy signature. The rhythm was almost hypnotic, a dance of light and power that defied explanation. "Admiral," Kane said, his voice tense, "the anomaly is destabilizing. Energy spikes are off the charts." Kael clenched his jaw. "What happens if it destabilizes completely?" "Best case scenario?" Kane hesitated. "Localized collapse? Worst case, it could trigger a chain reaction across the sector." "Not an option," Kael said firmly. "Prepare the fleet for immediate evacuation if necessary." As the crew scrambled to execute his orders, Kael's thoughts raced. The Empire's retreat, the alien vessel's actions, the anomaly's awakening. It was all connected, but the pieces refused to align. "Admiral," Taver interrupted, his voice cutting through the tension. "New transmission from the Empire. It's not a direct threat." Kael frowned. "Put it through." The screen flickered to life, revealing the imposing figure of High Chancellor Vorak Thalen. His scaled features were etched with an unfamiliar expression, one Kael hadn't expected to see. It wasn't arrogance or disdain. It was fear. "Admiral Kael Voss," Vorak began, his voice strained but steady, "you are venturing into territory you do not understand. Withdraw your forces immediately." Kael's eyes narrowed. "You're in no position to issue demands, Chancellor. Your fleet is retreating, your logistics are in disarray, and your grip on the colonies is slipping." Vorak's jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to the bait. "You think this is about the war? About your colonies? This is far greater than your petty rebellion. The construct you're approaching is a remnant of a power that nearly consumed the galaxy once before. If it awakens, It will not distinguish between Empire or Earth. Kael's mind raced, dissecting the Chancellor's words. The fear in his voice wasn't feigned, and that made it all the more dangerous. "What do you propose?" Kael asked cautiously. "Leave it untouched," Vorak said. "Let it remain dormant. If you tamper with it, you doom us all." Kael's gaze hardened. "And you expect me to take your word for it?" Vorak's expression darkened. "You may not trust me, Admiral, but consider this. If I wanted your destruction, I would let you proceed." The transmission cut abruptly, leaving Kael staring at the blank screen. His thoughts churned, the Chancellor's warning echoing in his mind. "Admiral," Kane said quietly, "what do we do?" Kael turned back to the tactical display, his jaw tightening as he made his decision. "We don't retreat. Not yet. But we don't engage recklessly either." Taver glanced at him, his expression cautious. "You believe him?" "I believe he's afraid," Kael said, "and fear makes even the most ruthless enemies honest." The alien vessel reached the anomaly, its glowing core flaring as it initiated some kind of interaction. The construct responded, its energy pulses growing stronger, more erratic. "Arian," Kael said, his voice firm, "analyze the interaction." "What's happening?" "Interaction classified as synchronization," the AI replied. "The construct is responding to the vessel's energy signature. Probability of full activation, 73%. Kael's pulse quickened. "And if it fully activates?" "Unpredictable," Arian said. "Potential outcomes include localized gravitational collapse, temporal distortion, or uncontrolled energy release." Kael's mind raced. The stakes had shifted again, and every move carried weight he couldn't afford to miscalculate. He had to act, but the path forward was shrouded in uncertainty. "Admiral," Taver said, his voice sharp, "we've detected movement, Empire reinforcements closing fast." Kael's eyes snapped to the display. The Empire's ships were coming, and this time they weren't holding back. "Battle stations," Kael ordered. "We hold this position." As the Resolute prepared for the coming fight, Kael's gaze returned to the anomaly. The construct pulsed like a living thing, its power growing with every passing second. The countdown ticked on, and Kael knew they were on the brink of something far greater than a war. Kael stood at the center of the Resolute's war room, his fingers drumming against the cold edge of the tactical console. Holographic projections filled the air around him, detailing the growing threats, the Empire's incoming reinforcements, the alien vessel's synchronization with the anomaly, and the unknown potential of the construct itself. Every second felt like a razor's edge, each decision carrying the weight of survival or annihilation. "We're out of time to deliberate," Kael said, his voice steady but clipped. His eyes swept over Taver, Kane, and the other officers gathered in the room. "We need a plan that accounts for three objectives: halting the Empire's advance, neutralizing the alien vessel's control over the construct, and ensuring we don't ignite whatever cataclysm lies dormant in that anomaly." Kane leaned over his console, his hands pulling up trajectory data for the Empire's fleet. "Their reinforcements will reach us in 20 minutes. Based on their formation, they're positioning for a pincer maneuver. If we engage conventionally, they'll box us in." "We won't engage conventionally," Kael said sharply. He gestured toward the anomaly on the display. "The construct's gravitational pulses are affecting the entire sector. If we can harness those fluctuations, we can create artificial choke points to force their fleet into a bottleneck." Taver's brow furrowed as he processed the idea. "You're proposing we weaponize the construct's instability? That's a dangerous gamble, Admiral. If we miscalculate—" "I know the risks," Kael interrupted. "But if we let them take the initiative, it's over. This isn't about matching them ship for ship. We have to dictate the terms of the battle." Kaen nodded slowly. "We can use cloaked decoys to manipulate their movements. Place them along key gravitational lines. Make it look like we're positioning for an ambush." Kael's lips tightened into a grim line. "Good. Deploy the decoys immediately. Taver, coordinate with Arian to map the anomaly's pulse patterns. We need precise timing to execute this." Taver hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded and began inputting commands. I'll need updated telemetry from our forward sensors. If the pulses shift mid-execution, we'll adapt, Kael said firmly. There's no other choice. As his officers dispersed to carry out their tasks, Kael turned back to the display, his mind racing through contingencies. The alien vessel remained an enigma, its synchronization with the anomaly deepening by the second. He couldn't afford to ignore it, but direct engagement risked triggering the very disaster they sought to prevent. "Admiral," Taver called, his voice taut, "Arian has completed the gravitational map. It's identified 3 key pulse nodes that can be leveraged for maximum disruption. But there's a problem." Kael crossed the room in 2 swift strides. "What kind of problem?" Taver brought up a secondary display, highlighting a point near the anomaly's edge. "The 3rd node intersects directly with the alien vessel's trajectory. If we utilize it, we'll provoke a reaction." Kael stared at the projection, weighing the options. "Can we disable the node without destabilizing the construct?" "Unlikely," Taver admitted. "The pulses are interdependent. Removing one could collapse the entire system or accelerate its activation." Kael's jaw tightened. The construct was a ticking time bomb, and every action they took seemed to shorten the fuse. But inaction was not an option. "We proceed as planned," Kael said. "Deploy the decoys to the first 2 nodes. Position the fleet at the 3rd. If the alien vessel reacts, we'll deal with it." The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of calculated precision. The black ships moved into formation, their cloaking systems blending them seamlessly into the darkness. Decoys deployed along the gravitational nodes, their faint energy signatures mimicking the presence of a full fleet. Kael monitored the operation from the bridge, the tension palpable in the air. The distant stars seemed to flicker, distorted by the anomaly's pulses. The deck beneath his boots vibrated faintly, a subtle reminder of the forces at play. "Decoys are in position," Taver reported. "The Empire's fleet is adjusting course. They're taking the bait." Kael's eyes narrowed as the tactical display updated. The Empire's ships shifted toward the decoys, their formation tightening as they prepared for an ambush that wasn't there. "Hold the fleet," Kael ordered. "Let them commit fully before we strike." The seconds dragged like hours as the Empire's ships moved deeper into the gravitational trap. Kael's pulse quickened, his senses sharpening with the weight of the moment. The display pulsed with data, each update a reminder of how close they were to the edge. "Admiral," Kane said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tension. "The alien vessel is accelerating. It's heading straight for the 3rd node." Kael's jaw clenched. "Taver, status on the fleet?" "All ships in position," Taver replied. "Standing by for your command." Kael's gaze flicked between the display and the viewport, where the faint glow of the anomaly cast eerie shadows across the bridge. The alien vessel was a blur of motion, its glowing core pulsating like a heartbeat as it neared the node. "Open fire on the alien vessel," Kael commanded. "Disable it before it reaches the node." The Resolute's weapons flared to life, streaks of energy slicing through the void. The alien vessel twisted with impossible agility, evading the barrage with movements that defied logic. Its glowing core brightened, sending waves of energy rippling outward. "Admiral, the anomaly is destabilizing," Taver shouted. "Energy levels are spiking across all nodes." Kael gripped the console, his mind racing. "Redirect all fire to the anomaly. We have to stabilize it." The fleet shifted its focus, weapons targeting the anomaly itself. Explosions rippled across its surface, each impact causing the pulses to flicker and dim. The alien vessel responded with renewed aggression, its core flaring as it launched an energy wave that struck the Resolute with bone-rattling force. "Shields at 60%, Kine reported. "We can't sustain another hit like that." Kael's jaw tightened. The alien vessel was protecting the anomaly, its actions confirming what he had suspected all along. It wasn't here to observe. It was here to ensure the construct's activation. "Tavor," Kael said, his voice low and commanding, "deploy the EMP disruptors. If we can't destroy it, we'll shut it down." Tavor's hands moved rapidly over the controls. Disruptors deployed. Detonation in 5, 4. The countdown echoed through the bridge, each second a drumbeat of tension. The EMP wave burst outward, a surge of energy that engulfed the alien vessel and the anomaly alike. The vessel's core flickered violently, its glow dimming as it drifted to a halt. "Admiral, the anomaly's pulses are stabilizing," Kane said, relief threading through his voice. "The construct is dormant again." Kael exhaled, his body sagging slightly as the weight of the moment lifted. The alien vessel hung motionless, its threat neutralized, for now. "Status on the Empire's fleet?" Kael asked. Taver glanced at the display. "They've pulled back. Looks like they're regrouping." Kael nodded, his mind already turning to the next steps. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, they had the upper hand. As the countdown continued, Kael knew the true test was still to come. Kael stood at the center of the bridge, his silhouette outlined by the faint light of distant stars. The anomaly lay quiet now, its erratic pulses replaced by an eerie stillness. The alien vessel hung motionless, its darkened core a stark contrast to the fierce energy it had wielded moments ago. Victory, if it could be called that, was tenuous. "Status on the fleet?" Kael asked, his voice calm but unyielding. "Minimal damage," Kane replied, his hands gliding over the console. "Shields are holding across most ships. The EMP worked. The alien vessel is inactive, at least for now." Kael nodded, though his expression betrayed no relief. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. His gaze returned to the display, where the Empire's retreating fleet lingered at the edge of the sector. They weren't defeated. They were waiting, calculating. "Admiral," Tavor said, his voice low but firm, "what do we do about the construct?" "Leaving it here feels dangerous." Kael's eyes narrowed as he studied the anomaly. Its power was undeniable, its potential catastrophic, and yet it had been dormant for millennia. "We secure it," Kael said after a long moment. "If the Empire reaches it first, they'll find a way to weaponize it. We can't allow that." Tavor hesitated. Arian might have a solution. Its calculations on the anomaly's structure were precise. It could devise a way to seal it or destroy it. Kael's jaw tightened. The AI had proven its value time and again, but its autonomy was a constant shadow hanging over their operations. He glanced at Tavor, then gave a sharp nod. "Bring Arian online," Kael ordered. The ship's lights dimmed briefly as the AI's presence surged through the systems. Its synthesized voice filled the air, calm and detached. "Admiral Voss, the anomaly is stable but remains a significant threat. Analysis suggests two options, suppression or annihilation." "Explain suppression," Kael said. "Suppression involves creating a containment field using the anomaly's own gravitational energy," Arian replied. "This would render it inert, but accessible for future study." "And annihilation?" "Complete destabilization of the anomaly," Arian said. "This would result in localized destruction, but eliminate the threat entirely. Probability of collateral damage, 87%. Kael exhaled slowly, his mind racing through the implications. Suppression meant leaving the construct intact, a potential asset, but also a liability. Annihilation would ensure its destruction, but at what cost? "Can suppression hold indefinitely?" Kael asked. "Unknown," Arian replied. "Gravitational fields degrade over time. The risk increases exponentially without regular maintenance." Kael's fists clenched at his sides. The decision was his to make, and every path carried consequences. He turned to Tavor. "What's your assessment?" Tavor met his gaze, his voice steady. "If we suppress it, we risk it falling into the wrong hands later. If we destroy it, we risk ourselves now. Either way, this construct is a problem we can't ignore." Kael nodded grimly. "Then we destroy it. Better to face the danger head-on than leave it to fester." "Understood," Arian said, initiating calculations for controlled destabilization. As the AI worked, Kael's thoughts turned to the Empire. Their retreat was calculated, their silence unnerving. High Chancellor Vorak's warning echoed in his mind, an anomaly capable of consuming the galaxy. And yet, the Empire had not intervened directly. "Admiral," Kane said, his voice breaking through Kael's reverie. "The Empire's fleet is repositioning. They're not leaving the sector." Kael's jaw tightened. "Of course they aren't. They're waiting for us to make the first mistake. Tavor frowned, his brow furrowed as he studied the tactical display. If we destabilize the anomaly, they might see it as an opportunity. They could strike while we're vulnerable. Kael turned to face his crew, his voice cutting through the tension. Then we make sure they don't get the chance. Prepare the fleet for full defensive operations, all ships to high alert. The bridge came alive with activity, officers relaying commands and systems powering up. The air vibrated with anticipation, the weight of impending conflict pressing down on every soul aboard the Resolute. "Arian," Kael said, his tone sharp, "how long until the destabilization process is complete?" 17 minutes, the AI replied. Synchronization with the anomaly's energy pulses is critical to minimize collateral damage. Kael's gaze hardened. "We'll buy you the time." The Empire's fleet began to move, their ships advancing slowly but deliberately. Their formation was tight, their intentions clear. They weren't coming to observe. "Admiral," Tavor said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air, "they'll reach engagement range in 10 minutes. Kael's mind raced, his thoughts a whirlwind of strategies and contingencies. The odds were stacked against them, but he had no intention of surrendering the initiative. "Deploy the black ships in staggered formation," Kael commanded. "We create a kill box, draw them into the anomaly's gravitational field and let it work against them." Tavor nodded, relaying the orders. The fleet shifted into position, their dark forms moving with precision and purpose. The gravitational distortions of the anomaly created unpredictable currents, turning the battlefield into a deadly maze. The Empire's ships entered the trap, their movements cautious but determined. The first volleys were exchanged, streaks of energy slicing through the void. The Resolute's shields flared as enemy fire struck, but the fleet held firm. "Admiral," Kane called out, "the anomaly's pulses are intensifying. Arian's destabilization sequence is nearing completion." Kael's gaze remained fixed on the display. "Hold the line. We don't let them through." The battle raged, a symphony of destruction and strategy. Kael's commands were sharp and precise, his crew executing them with unwavering resolve. The Empire's forces were relentless, but the black ships fought with a ferocity born of desperation and determination. "Admiral," Tavor said urgently, "the Empire's flagship is breaking through the line. They're making a direct run for the anomaly." Kael's eyes narrowed. "Target their engines. Disable them." The Resolute's weapons fired, a concentrated barrage that struck the Empire's flagship with devastating force. Its engines sputtered, its momentum faltering as it drifted into the anomaly's gravitational pull. "Arian," Kael said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Status on the destabilization." "Sequence complete," the AI replied. "Detonation imminent." Kael exhaled, his body tensing as the anomaly began to collapse. Its pulses grew erratic, each one sending ripples of energy through the battlefield. The Empire's ships scrambled to retreat, their formation disintegrating in the face of the impending explosion. "Pull back the fleet," Kael ordered. "Get us clear of the blast radius." The black ships moved as one, their engines flaring as they raced away from the anomaly. Behind them, the construct erupted in a blinding burst of light and energy, its gravitational field collapsing in on itself. The shockwave rippled through the sector, scattering debris and disabling systems. As the Resolute steadied, Kael stood in silence, his gaze fixed on the fading light of the anomaly's destruction. The Empire's fleet was in disarray, their forces retreating once more. "Admiral," Tavor said quietly, "the anomaly is gone. It's over." Kael shook his head, his expression resolute. "It's just beginning. They underestimated us once. They won't make that mistake again." He turned to face his crew, his voice firm but filled with conviction. "But let them come. Let them see what humanity is capable of. We've faced the darkness, and we've survived. We don't just endure, we rise." The bridge fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the crew. Humanity had proven its worth, its resilience, its defiance. And as the countdown finally ended, Kael knew their fight was far from over. But they would face it together, unbroken and unyielding. Humanity was here to stay.